Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Tolles. I'm glad to be able to have you and host you for tonight's topic. And in this live stream, we're talking about some common misunderstandings that trap people on the spiritual path. I hope tonight that I can offer some guidance to focus you appropriately so that you can continue to heal and grow on your spiritual paths. Too often, there are just all these interesting little traps that keep us stuck and keep us trying to grasp to things that will not help us, that will not serve us, and some things will do quite the reverse. So as we settle in and people log on to listen, it's always great if somebody can just type a quick hello or an I can hear you into the chat pod before I get going to make sure that you can hear me. As always, I like to remind everyone I do these live streams every 2 weeks. So this is the 6 p.m. Pacific time, and then on 2 weeks I'll alternate back to the 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Sujata. And to answer a question that I had on... thanks, Alyssa. To answer a question that I got in email, these are all recorded. So basically about 15 to 20 minutes after this is done, it automatically uploads to my YouTube account. So you just go to Jim Tolles and you'll be able to hear this in its entirety in case you felt like you missed something or you immediately want to rehear it. And then later on, I also post it to my blog and embed it so you can watch it there. But as I was saying, I do these talks every 2 weeks and they're always free and you're always welcome to join. The next one I'm going to do about finding inner peace, because I think this is just such an interesting topic to really get into and how it's different than some of these other experiences that we have in the spiritual path and what I really mean when I'm talking about inner peace. And so that will be at the 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. And for those who are new to me, the reason I switch them like this is because some of the people I connect with are in Europe, and right now it's like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. depending on where in Europe some of my students and friends and supporters are. And conversely, like I do the 6 p.m.s because a lot of my friends, students, and supporters in the US work and don't have time to listen till after work. And this also is a time that tends to work for my friends in Australia. So that's why I do it the way I do it. As always, I welcome your questions and your comments, but usually for the first 30 minutes or so, I'm going to free flow, and so I just kind of intuitively share. So if you put a question or comment during that time, I will get back to it as I'm intuitively guided, and I won't necessarily immediately answer it. And to ask a question or post a comment, you have to be logged in, and please keep the comments and questions pointed to me. So not talking amongst each other. It's such a small space. And if we get any number of people past 20 or 30, if we start having these other conversations going on, I might not be able to see some of the questions and comments pointed to me. And if anyone has wandered across this live stream and doesn't know me at all, I'm Jim Tolles. I blog regularly at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. And you can find a whole bunch of videos underneath on my channel of the same name. It's just Jim Tolles. So with that, let's talk about some of these misunderstandings. And the one that I want to jump into right away has to do with this misunderstanding around needing the right set of beliefs. Right? This is very, very common. And there are certainly different spiritual traditions that profess this belief, that you have to have the right set of beliefs to be spiritual, to be saved, to be enlightened, to be something, right? There's usually a carrot at the end of the stick whenever somebody starts telling you that you must do or be a certain way. And this isn't true. You don't have to have the right set of beliefs because ultimately spiritual truth isn't a set of ideas, it's a reality. Think of spiritual truth like gravity, that you can believe in gravity or not, but it's still going to continue to exist. The same way you can believe that you exist or not, but you are still here now. Right? Your belief doesn't come into it. What we do with beliefs in the spiritual path is to help us go inwards to these spiritual truths, to understand them, and to help us peel away layers of our own illusion, our own fears, our own confusions, right? So in this way, we have a belief that maybe meditation helps us, but the belief isn't the fundamental thing there, right? It's the meditation that when you sit and you're present and you breathe and you let go of your thoughts, things shift and change for you. Right? So you don't have to believe in that. Right? There's definitely certain levels of benefits that through regular meditation you start to notice. And I think this is particularly interesting when we get into some of these energy workers and some of the New Age things that are also asking people to just believe that it works. Now, energy is a very real thing, and sometimes that feels like belief for a lot of people at first, but as you investigate and become more open to yourself, you will learn a lot of different things about energy. So there's a difference between being ignorant of something initially, so not knowing something exists, not having an experience with it, and so relying on belief at first. But with the spiritual path, it's so important to be able to investigate this to find out. So I have to believe that we have the capacity to go to the moon because I've never been to the moon. I have not seen the space shuttles, in person. I haven't been in one that took me there. But, I've seen some other things, and I'm happy to accept as just a belief without going to prove this fact to myself that we have that capability. We can take a rocket, blast in the sky, safely land there, and come back. Right? So that's something I am believing in. But we have some historical fact and some things like that that we can kind of rely on. The beautiful thing about spiritual truth, as I said, is it's real. It's something that you can investigate for yourself. It's something that you can find out for yourself. And so when I talk about meditation and journaling and all these other things, they're ways that you can investigate for yourself. You should always be careful of any spiritual teacher or tradition says, just believe what I say. We're adults here. We're able to fully comprehend things, and spiritual truth ultimately tends to be very simple. It's not a complicated thing. You are here now. We're all interconnected. These sort of truths become more and more obvious. The here and now one is pretty much obvious to all of you right now, but the interconnected may not seem so obvious at first, but as you investigate and you're open to yourself and you explore more of life, you start to find out, well, actually, I really do start to get this sense of interconnection with life itself. That actually is a reality. It is not a belief. And a lot of times, systems that are asking you to just believe without thinking about this or without questioning it, they're going to have some sort of goal in mind, some sort of thing that you have to get, some way of feeling safe is usually kind of at the core of it when you dig into a lot of these different things. And so be very mindful of those types of promises. So I'm not really promising you anything. I'm saying you already have all the things that you want. And that's not a promise. And that's something you can investigate. So that's what I'm offering you here is the way out of the trap, that investigation, that self-inquiry. It's a way to get away from just mindlessly believing that something is right or something is wrong or something is moving when it's not. If you don't feel anything with whatever work you're doing, then pay attention to that. And sometimes we're numb to a lot of different things, and there's a lot that we learn about with ourselves for sure. And sometimes initially we kind of have this sort of belief and faith that something is going to arise through regular meditation, and generally speaking, that does happen. And you learn more about yourself. So that's a big trap, and I'll probably come back to it when people start asking questions, but it really is this trap of thinking that you need a set of beliefs to be spiritual. And you don't. You're already here. You're already an interconnected being. You are already spiritual. Now, certain practices do help us to better understand what's already here and to peel away illusion. But ultimately, they're not necessary, and we can drop all of this illusion whenever we want. And to differing degrees, we do that. There'll be certain jumps people have in understanding and being able to rest in their inner peace. It's just at some point, something just kind of drops like, oh, I don't need to hold on to this belief or this attachment. It just drops. and you see what's already here. There's something else about belief that is intangible, that you never can get your hands around, where the truth actually is, in a strange way, tangibly intangible and tangibly tangible. It sounds like a contradiction, but like the being here now part, it's like, here you are. You don't really have to believe in that, as I said. So the next two that I want to talk about, these other next misunderstandings, are around experiences. So a lot of times people have these ideas that they have to have a certain type of spiritual experience. And usually, for those who have something that feels really good, it's usually like a bliss experience or a deep level of peace. They start to think, how do I have this experience all the time? And those two are both enormous traps. So coming back to the being here now, in our presence and being here now, this space inside us embraces everything. It embraces all your experiences. So it doesn't say one thing is spiritual and one thing is not. That being said, there are certain activities, certain experiences that help us to focus initially, to come back to reality. And that tends to be really important for most of us, that we explore ourselves and we work through certain levels of ego self that we're holding on to. And the holding on to is the key part. If we didn't hold on to them, we'd have nothing to work through. we really would just rest in this present moment. But the way we would orient towards it would be very different, because we really would be coming from that space of clear seeing that, oh, wow, yeah, everything is connected. I am here. We're all one. Right? This sort of level of understanding. So the practices that are important as sort of guiding experiences, guiding you back to yourself. And that's the key thing, that whatever you're doing with your spiritual work, it has to be guiding you back inwards into the space of truth within you. And a lot of the misunderstandings at the core of what we're talking about here is a focus externally, that there's something out there. Even ideas are kind of out there. We're usually adopting other ideas rather than understanding ourselves or understanding the hidden assumptions we have that these new beliefs kind of mask. So many people, they go off on these long journeys looking for the right experiences, right? They become spiritual tourists and they go spend times at retreats. And you have people that are called spiritual retreat junkies, right? They just love that experience. They can't have enough of it. And they think this is what they're supposed to have. That's the key thing. It's great if you enjoy spiritual retreats. That's fantastic. As far as pastimes go, I highly recommend it. There are a lot of other pastimes that stink. It's like, if you would rather be just hanging out at spiritual retreat centers rather than at bars all the time, I think that's great. But one is no more spiritual than the other, ultimately. But usually as we come more into ourselves, hanging out at bars isn't necessarily a whole lot of fun to watch people drop themselves into greater levels of unconsciousness. But the main point is this outward search is counterproductive. And no sooner than you have a really good experience, right, going on to the next misunderstanding, that you have an experience, you're like, okay, this feels really great, so I want to replicate it. I want to have this one all the time. That's not how the human experience works. Human experiences are always changing. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you just feel a whole bunch of dread for no reason. Right? Have you lost something? Are you no longer spiritual because your body is barfing out these chemicals into you that morning? No. It's just the body is having a different experience again. And that's just such an important thing to learn how to embrace and to be with, and say, okay, it's a different experience. I will be with this one. Yesterday it was bliss. Today it's dread. By mid-afternoon, it will be anticipation, will be arising or something. Right? This body is always changing and shifting. Now, through certain practices, these experiences that guide us inwards, right? That's the key, that they're guiding us inwards. We start to let go of a lot of attachments that influence different changes in how we feel and the feelings we choose. As many of you know, I like to emphasize that we choose our feelings. Too often we think it has something to do with the external world, and this is part of the core confusion, the core misunderstanding that the external world is going to give us what we want, and it will continue to give us what we want anytime we want it, all the time. And that's not how it is. Even for somebody who's living a very graced and comfortable life, never having to want for anything, everything for whatever reason just keeps going their way, there's going to be ups and downs in the emotional space for them. Some things will ebb and flow. It's natural. But it becomes a really, really nasty trap once somebody has some really great experience that they call a spiritual experience, like bliss, and how they have to start grasping to get it back. Right? That's what a desire is, just a reflection of the ego, that the ego is trying to get something back, keeps trying and trying and trying. And sometimes it will succeed for a while and then the thing will go. Or one of the big things that happens with any sort of experiences will normalize to it. So think about the first time you had something you really enjoyed for food. So ice cream or pizza or cake, or it doesn't matter what it was, that you just really, really enjoyed it. And then you've had it more since, but is it really the same? And actually, if we have too much of some of these things, after a while we kind of get sick of it. And while I don't know that I would get sick of bliss per se, the point is that these things normalize, that we relax more into a state of just being closer to that sort of level of openness. And so it just becomes normal. But the ego that needs this sort of excitement, right? A lot of egos need excitement to kind of feel a certain level of excited aliveness that these particular people prefer. It'll then have to go looking for something else. It'll assume the experience is gone. And it may be to some degree, but a lot of experiences also simply our response to life. Do we respond favorably or unfavorably? Sometimes people will sit with me and for whatever reason they respond very favorably, and so they can open up more and they feel more relaxed, and other people respond unfavorably. And so it's more scary or confronting to be in this space with me and to connect. So the experiences and ideas that are most useful in the spiritual path guide us inwards. And we don't have to hold on to them or believe them. And if they don't work, we don't have to do them. And I think this leads into this interesting point around how long it takes to become enlightened. Because so many people out there talk about, you need so many years of meditation before you become enlightened. And it really avoids the question of, what do we mean when we say enlightenment? So, that's the first question you should ask if you ever hear something like that. It's like, what do you mean by enlightenment? Find out. When I talk about it, I'm usually talking about the starting point, where there's this opening to awareness where suddenly you have like the lights in the room. And light in the room simply shows you what's in the room. It doesn't clean up the room. So in this way, there's no time, actually. That it's just like kind of a switch goes on when I talk about enlightenment and awakening, and I use them synonymously. It's like a switch goes on. There it is. There's your trash in the middle of the room. There's your comfy bed, right? And a lot of people don't want to clean up the trash. They'd rather just lie in the comfy bed. Some people see so much trash that they want to close their eyes and make it all go away. And there's all sorts of responses people can have. And so usually what arises is this natural inner cleaning process that does itself. And that's really the key thing that I mention when I talk about enlightenment and awakening, that it starts to do itself, starts to move through you, these issues, the garbage that you say, that you're now aware of. So with that part, there becomes a human process of cleaning and healing, but there's not an endpoint. So the question of how long does it take to become enlightened, if we're thinking about in terms of being at peace with all of life, I suppose, sort of the total enlightenment question, which anytime you start to speak in those terms, that gets really, really problematic, because now we're creating more ideas again, right? Say this is a total enlightenment. Well, how do you measure that? So do we say that somebody has to be okay with someone just chopping their arm off and they're at peace with that, like at peace with everything? And I think that's what that means. But I find that these sort of hard definitions and goals are usually counterproductive. Because if you really are getting towards those spaces, you don't care about goals anymore. And earlier on, when you do care, it frustrates you. So that idea ultimately becomes very useless. It's not useful to somebody who's kind of deeper in peace with themselves and things are naturally continuing to open and they know themselves and they know their process. And it's not really particularly helpful for too many people early on, because it becomes a point of frustration of how do I get there and I'm not there yet, and self-judgment. And it certainly can illuminate self-judgment if you use your awareness in that way around having that sort of a goal. I think to a certain degree, aspiration is useful. So I make a difference between judgment and aspiration, where aspiration is like this thing out there that it's of interest to you. And we could say it's like being totally enlightened. But you don't hold on to it. And it doesn't matter if you're moving there or not. You find certainly tools that help you, guide you in that direction, but you don't need to get there. And it's not this driving desire that makes you judge everything you do, versus the judgment and the ego self that needs to know if it's succeeding, if it's safe. I mean, that's ultimately what total enlightenment becomes for a lot of people. It's this hope towards total safety, which is not what enlightenment is about. But that's some of the hidden beliefs that can get stuck in the judgment and stuck in the goal orientation. So goals really are one of those many ideas that become traps for people. But as I said, sort of having aspirations, and earlier on when there are very distinctive levels of healing that need to happen, harder goals, I suppose, are still useful. And so that's like getting sober. So if you've been an alcoholic, that sort of a thing, or getting off of the drugs that you're hooked on. Those types of things become more useful to have clearer goals. Okay, you see what I mean? But as we move on and we're healed from that, hard goals to try and get someplace become more and more problematic. And even those goals, with getting sober, if that's leading towards a whole lot of judgment, right, that's making it more difficult too. So there's a softness to truly turning inwards that I want to point everyone towards. That it is okay to look to the future, right? So we're not getting so lost in the present. There's a difference between being present and being lost in the present. I think I wrote a blog about that a while ago. And it's so important to understand that there's that distinction, that we can be in the present, but we can still recall the past, and we can still look to the future of what we're creating, what we're aspiring towards, but we don't need to hold on to it. So as far as enlightenment, the initial moment of the light turning on, there's no time amount. I've worked with people who are, have had enlightenment in their early teen years, or in their 20s, in their 30s, 40s, right? There's no time frame for that switch turning on. For letting go of these attachments, that also varies, and it's going to completely depend on the person in terms of how they let go, what they're holding on to, how they're going to grow in life. Sometimes I describe each of us as different little plants. So the cedar tree grows differently than the redwood tree, grows differently than the blueberry bush, right? Those are all still seeds, but they're all going to grow very differently and demand different things of different people. So the whole concept of how long it takes to be enlightened, I find, is absolutely useless, really a big source of frustration for a lot of people. And it can be a source of, I guess, some sort of power for some people who think that they have gotten enlightened through 30 years of whatever they thought they were supposed to do. So there's plenty of spiritual ego out there to be aware of. Oh, and it's kind of implicit in what I was just saying, but there's also this misunderstanding around awakening enlightenment that it will solve all your problems. That you just have that switch turn on and no more problems in life. Now, as far as the ego self goes, that is part of the healing that happens. That as we have the light switch on and we start letting go of things, and I suppose it's possible for somebody to just let go of everything immediately upon awakening and stay there, because anything is possible. But most of us, it seems, we tend to hold on to a lot of stuff, and we have to learn how to actively let it go. And of course, the stuff that we easily let go of, we don't realize we let go of, and that's just kind of how it is. Like the stuff that drops away very quickly and easily, it just goes. And you don't realize that you've let it go because it wasn't a big deal. Well, the stuff you do remember is the stuff you didn't let go of and you've been holding on to so hard. Yeah, so awakening enlightenment, it doesn't get rid of all life's difficulties. Like, you can have an awakening and be in the middle of a civil war. It doesn't get rid of the civil war. It just opens you up to your full capabilities and being able to deal with it in whatever way you can, and to be at peace with the strife. And that would be a very powerful lesson, to be at peace with that sort of strife. Most of the rest of us are fortunately not in the middle of civil wars, so we find ourselves basically just becoming at peace with ourselves, because that's usually where the biggest civil war is at, and that's what we're surrendering to. We're surrendering to our own fight against ourselves. Now, there's a topic around how we sense energy that I also want to touch on that's a big misunderstanding, and it's leading people to create more ideas and more kinds of separation, and that's that we absorb stuff from other people. Now, being interconnected, ultimately, we are other people and that there is no separation. So it's not surprising that a lot of people, as they open up further, will feel more. But my genuine experience is that if you're feeling something that's upsetting to you, then whatever the energy or person or reaction you're seeing, all that's doing is triggering something that's already inside of you. And so this is just yet another way where we try to blame the external world for bad feelings and try to get the external world to give us good feelings rather than taking ownership of our inner space. So it's a big, big deal for anybody who's empathic or highly sensitive or whatever term we want to use to start to notice when they feel bad around other people and focus on their bodies, focus on figuring out what the issue is inside of them, because that's your Velcro. There's all sorts of dust particles blowing around in our proverbial worlds, and it's the Velcro in us, our issues, that grab those things and hold on, and they get activated and they say they're in pain. But instead of saying, oh, I'm in pain, this is so-and-so across the room's fault because I can feel their bad energy and I have to get away from him or her, we say, oh, this other person's activating something inside me. What is this? How can I breathe in and relax into it and be with this uncomfortable feeling? And as you dissolve that Velcro, you'll find that so-and-so across the room wasn't the problem. Depending on the person, depending on your issue, sometimes, this activation is actually a sign of a very deep, powerful connection. But the only way for that connection to work is for the pain that you have inside of you to dissolve away so that you can have a clear connection together. So this occasionally happens with the soulmate twin flame stuff that people talk about. Those are other ideas that I'm very cautious about, because if we're all one, we're all united. Everybody's a soulmate and twin flame, right? And the more you can open up, the more you can open to deep levels of connection with lots of people. It's just those terms, soulmate and twin flame, tend to get applied to the people who are the first ones we feel like that romantically with. And that's usually where we stop. We don't seem to think that, hey, maybe we can have even bigger, broader, and healthier connections with more people. It's more like, right, and this is an ego thing. Oh, here's one thing, I got to have that. And so there's the desire thing again. Right, so the way the ego self and its pain can get us truly lost is it gets us into that singular thing of, I want that one person. I want that bliss experience. I want to get there immediately, right? So it has no patience as well. So it's kind of ironic that the more we relax into the space, which is actually what we want anyway, that requires us no time at all to get to it. But the changes that we human beings go through require a lot of patience. So it's one of many paradoxes. And the paradox in this case isn't an idea. It really is an explanation of truth. And this is why we have to be careful about that misunderstanding around seeking the right set of ideas. Because when we do that, we create this concept of a paradox where like two things can't be equally true. That they certain things mutually conflict. So like oneness and duality. But clearly, as some of you have experienced and understand, we are one, and yet we're also separate. And so in English language and a lot of Western logic, this seems to be a conflict. But what's the problem? The problem is the logic, because the logic is wrong. If the idea structure does not reflect reality that we live in, that's the problem, not the reality we live in. So that's a different way to look at a lot of paradoxes, and why it's better to trust the paradox, because the conflict you're feeling just has to do with the logic you've been taught, not with reality. So I think those are kind of the main six that come to mind. And so you have to find the right beliefs, and that's a trap. You have to have the right experience, and that can be really confusing for a lot of people, just because they'll feel like, well, I've never had a really big spiritual experience, so I guess I'm not doing it right. That's part of the trap there for some people, as opposed to seeing all of life as spiritual. You can achieve the bliss or peaceful experience all the time is another trap, because no, the human experience is always changing. Awakening enlightenment solves all your problems? Absolutely not. It just illuminates a lot of life, and that usually shows you a lot of your issues. It takes a long time to become enlightened. No, right? That's a switch that goes on or off. The things that change more gradually over time is around becoming more conscious of ourselves, of getting to understand ourselves more and more, and letting go. And that letting go process, of course, is completely up to us. So it doesn't have to take a long time. And then other people's energies make me feel bad. And once again, this is another way it works, just externalizing onto life and wanting life to make us feel good all the time. And that's predominantly not true. The more clear you are and the less of that Velcro I just mentioned you have, you can feel discomfort, but it's like a cold wind, right? You don't take it personally and you don't get too upset about it. And even as you go further into relaxing into spaciousness, you don't really worry too much about the temperature of the wind. It just doesn't register for you. So those are 6 misunderstandings, and there's many more, but I think they're really, really big and important to understand. And they all ultimately kind of are the same in the sense of that externalizing it, looking to the external world to feel safe and feel good all the time, rather than looking to the internal world and seeing yourself for who you are, and asking the simple question of, if I'm not at peace with this current moment, why am I not at peace? What am I doing to keep myself separate from being at peace? And I'm talking about the emotional, mental levels. If we get into chronic sicknesses and other diseases, those are real issues. And so actually it's really, really important to be at peace, at least on the head and the heart level, so that you can manage the physical pain that you're in. And I suppose, this is another misunderstanding that kind of comes to mind as I'm free-flowing, is this idea that if you do all the right spiritual things, then you won't have any physical problems. You won't have disease, you won't age or something or whatever. But those types of ideas are out there, and they're absolutely not true. Aging and pain are part of the physical body's experience. And so you're not necessarily doing anything wrong if you're having physical pains. I mean, there are certainly physical pains that build up through how we think and act and how we eat and all those different things, for sure. And when we resolve some of those different issues, the body heals and opens in all sorts of ways. I've seen it so many times in myself and others. But it's also going to be true for some people that physical pain, chronic issues, and diseases are going to be part of their experience in this life. And that's not because they're doing anything wrong. So on that note, I think I'll pause with those 7. And if people have comments or questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to type them in. For anyone who doesn't already know, my name is Jim Tolles. I blogger at spiritualawakeningprocess.com if you've just joined me. And for those who would like to donate to help support me, because everything I do is supported by donations, if you go to spiritualawakeningprocess.com, there's a donation button on the right-hand side with a couple of amounts that you can donate. And if you have a different amount you'd like to donate, just email me and I can send you a link to send a custom amount. And thanks to all of you who do support me, because as I said, I'm here because of you. I get to do this full time, and I've been able to do it full time, fully supported by donations since March of 2015. And I apologize if I don't get everybody's name right. So there's a question from Sujata. Other people making me feel bad, bringing out the negative feelings of me. How do I deal with this? So one of the blog posts of a couple that I have, Sujata, is it's about absorbing other people's emotions. So that's when you can search for on Google or on my blog, and that can talk about it. And I think I have some other, I think a highly sensitive person talk that's recorded on YouTube as well that you can search, and I'll talk a lot more about that. But the main thing is, like what I said before, that when you're feeling any sort of pain or upset, go towards that feeling in your body and think of it as Velcro. It's like, okay, some part of me is upset. What part of me is upset? And breathing into the feelings and being mindful of those things to help them start to melt and to release on their own. And that will lead you towards whatever your next steps happen to be. And that's a big part of going inwards, is we do the first step and then the next steps kind of reveal themselves. If we need to journal about something or meditate on it, or if we've done enough just by acknowledging the feeling, or if there's something else going on. But always, always look within first. that's just so central to this. But that's where the truth is. It's not out there, and it's not in finding a place where nobody ever triggers you. If you do that, you're just going to end up living in a box in Montana, holding on for dear life, afraid of everything. And that's ultimately, one of the huge problems of the ego is just everything will start to become no longer safe the more you just keep hiding from these difficult feelings as opposed to embracing them. Thanks for the question. And please check out the video and some of the posts that I have on my blog. And absorbing other people's emotions is one of them. From Jonas, when I'm trying to be aware psychological pain is triggered, is it strengthening the ego? I'm not exactly sure what you mean that being aware triggers psychological pain. I mean, if you're being aware, maybe you're noticing psychological pain. What strengthens the ego is if you believe that it's a problem, if you act it out, if you get lost in thoughts about it, that strengthens the ego. But if you're just aware of it, then you're going to find out how strong it already is and how much energy you've already put into it. And as many of you have heard me say multiple times, think of a lot of our ego and mind issues like a spinning fan, that unplugging it and being aware doesn't stop the fan from spinning. It takes a while for that fan to unwind itself. And so that's where the patience part comes in. And that's where we appreciate the reality of time that we live in, that certain things take a while to break down and change. And there's no effort in being aware, actually, for the follow-on. So if you're efforting, that sounds like the ego trying to do something or get someplace, then that's a little concerning, because awareness is just noticing. You just notice. It's like right now as you're sitting and you're hearing me, you can just notice that. The responses in your mind around whether you believe what I say or not believe what I say, if you like what I say or if you don't like, right? You can notice all those things too. So there's really no effort to that. Anytime you start efforting something, you're trying to get somewhere and trying to focus your attention in some sort of way to get something. And so you need to step back even further, just to be like, oh, here's this effort. Okay, what is this effort doing? And maybe that will show you some other level of constriction or tension that's already going on inside you that you hadn't noticed before. So from Laura, what are some ways to figure out you're stuck? What do you mean by stuck? I think that'd be the start of that question, Laura. It's like, if you feel like you're stuck, what does that mean? Because there's a lot of different experiences we can have, and sometimes stuck is the way the ego says, I don't like where I am, and I think I should be someplace else that's better. Sometimes stuck is we are holding on and avoiding doing things that we need to do, that we know we need to do. And in that case, I would say that's a more truthful kind of stuckness, as opposed to the ego just not liking the present moment. That's always something to be mindful of, is like, how much of this is really just the ego not liking now? And so if there's some more you could kind of give me around what it means to feel stuck for you, then I can kind of address it more directly. But even what I've said, kind of points to some misunderstandings around, like, the ego can be very future seeking, that if at any time, like, whatever it is that you think you want is in the future, that's not it. Right? Because the future is never here, and even if you get that moment that you think you want in the future, then pretty soon that moment is gone. And so there's kind of a hidden preference going on that you need to root out to understand what exactly you're looking for. And in looking for that, you're comparing it against your current situation and deciding that you are stuck. And thanks for the questions and comments so far. For anyone who hasn't asked a question, feel free to do so. You just have to be logged into the YouTube to post in the live chat. And thanks as always for everyone for being respectful with your questions. I appreciate that. And being willing to hear something that perhaps is different than what your ego wants to hear. And that's a really important aspect of flexibility that I think is part of a maturity that really needs to be there to some degree to even get started in the spiritual path. It's a willingness to understand that our beliefs don't matter that much And that maybe there's something else out there that we can learn from. And this is different than just being kind of like, a brainless blob. It's never that. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about letting go of ideas, but I'm not saying have no ability to use ideas. We're just opening up possibility. And so when we sit in these conversations, this really is about opening up to possibilities, to new ways to understand yourself and to look inwards. Well, if you figure out how you want to phrase it, feel free to let me know. From the Mad Stork, how can you avoid getting pulled into an ego competition with family members? Well, see, this is great that you bring it up, because family is the gold mine of inner work. Because in this, depending on who your caregivers were, most people it was a family, but it could be, you could grow up with an orphanage, it could be an extended family. So everyone has different initial upbringings, but those initial upbringings define how we think about life. And so that sets kind of the base ego program inside of us. And so when you try to step outside that ego program that the rest of your family is still operating from, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of love and hugs for that. It's the rare family, in my experience, that gives people freedom to do something different, and rarer still those that encourage it, and even rarer still those that not only encourage it, but apply what the person who is doing the inner work has done in their own lives. And this is just all saying that when you change, that requires other people to change to be able to connect to you now. Or you have to go back to playing the old game, whatever that old game is. And so that's a really nasty choice that a lot of people don't necessarily want to have to deal with. So the simplest thing, of course, is to just be quiet. Just have no opinion, because most ego competition with family members is irrelevant. It's not usually a life or death situation. That's always kind of my caveat in this, that when there's a near and present danger, how we operate with that and how we interact with that becomes really important. But most of the times when we're dealing with families, it's not. It's arguing about TV or politics or where you're going to go eat tonight or whatever. And so those sort of competition really are irrelevant. And you can go do something with them like that or not. You can go do the thing that you otherwise were no longer interested in, like go sit at the bar with everybody while they're drinking, or you can not do that. And people will certainly try to draw you in and say, why are you different? Why have you changed? Why can't you just get along with everybody now, right? It's the way that other egos are going to try and blame you, but that, of course, leads you to more of your own inner work. That if you can be triggered into playing that game, you've just found more of your own issues to work out. And it's just with family in particular, because they set the base program, we've got more triggers, more different things that we're working out on our own and changing. And then, of course, as we change, that will probably trigger a lot of the stuff inside them, and they will try to blame you and draw you in. But as I said, the drawing you in, that's an opportunity to go deeper in your inner work and see if you can be more at peace. Even as you're feeling the anger rise, come back to awareness. Say, oh, here's anger coming up. And slow down. So slowing down is a way that we can help avoid reacting. And then if you need to say or do something, then say it. But as I said, most of the time, we don't need to say anything, and we can just let silence be our ally, and they may hate that even more. So I'm obviously not offering any, golden threads out of the way of the stickiness of it, but rather just encouraging you into that stickiness if it's a situation you have to regularly engage with, so that you can find your way out, you can find more clarity and more peacefulness within yourself. And the more you can do that when you're dealing with family and all the triggers that are so deeply embedded in your code, the easier it is to deal with just about any other situation you'll come across. So thanks for the question. Next question from Jonas says, I've realized there is much resistance when I'm with my mother. As a result, I've become bitter with her. How can that be worked out? Well, you breathe into the anger, right? The bitterness is your response, right? So that's always the first step, is when we take ownership, like, this is mine, right? It's not her. She can't put bitterness inside you. In fact, somebody can punch you, but if we didn't have a nervous system, we wouldn't even feel that, right? This is how internal our feelings are. Like, all of our feelings come from us. So if somebody punches us, right? That's our nervous system telling us something. And it's useful, right? We want our nervous system to tell us if our body is being harmed. Most of the rest of the time, our body is not being harmed. It's an emotional choice that says, oh, I heard these 5 words. This hot air came out of somebody's mouth, and now I'm bitter. Or they did X, Y, and Z, and I saw them do that, and I interpret in this mind that this is something I should be bitter about. These are all choices. So breathing and relaxing is a way we start to unwind those choices and to look at them and to be with them and say, oh, okay, here's bitterness. I'm sitting with this right now. This is mine. I'm taking ownership of this, and I'm taking ownership of the choice. Right? That's so empowering. When we take ownership of our own choices, it changes everything. And this is why this ultimately the trap that we're talking about and all these misunderstandings tonight is the externalizing, that we're saying somebody else is doing this or making me this or giving me this or I can get that from this. Right? When we externalize, we disempower ourselves because now we're completely at the whim of whatever our spouse does, our mother does, our friends do. We're at the whim of whatever our spiritual teacher does, what the spiritual retreat is like. Oh, the spiritual retreat wasn't any good. The teacher there sucked, So we've externalized our opportunity to be at peace with that situation, and we gave it to somebody else, and we felt like they dropped the ball. Well, people are going to constantly be dropping the ball. And that's just a reminder to go within and to find our own peace that is independent of whatever is going on around us. Follow-up from the Mad Stork says, how to react to someone who is critical of the things you like. It's the same as, the choice to be bitter. Whatever your choice is, whether it's being sad or upset or scared that somebody's being critical of the things you like, that's your choice. You don't have to have any response to somebody who's critical of the things you like. So long as we're not doing anything physically harmful to you, it's irrelevant. It's just we're so used to these deeper beliefs saying that we should care. And it'll tell us which people we should care about and all these types of things. And it's such a nasty trap. For people who looks like who've just joined, I just want to remind you that I'm Jim Tolles, and we're talking about misunderstandings that trap people in the spiritual path. And you can type questions into the chat pod. And we've got about 13 minutes, so if someone hasn't asked a question yet, feel free to do so. But is this becoming clear, and an acknowledgement might be kind of good. Is it clear, that the focus is to go within, that anything external, whether it's a teacher, an idea, an experience you had at a retreat or any of that, that is external and that will continue to shift and change. You can't stabilize it. You can't make it keep giving you the same thing. And it's really the more that we drop into the inner space, the things start to flow and become more dynamic. Things inside start to change, and awareness kind of opens up like a flower, that we start to see more and more things. It's really a beautiful thing, and it confounds many people when they find out they actually don't need to do anything. They just need to stop doing all the other things, and then awareness starts to unfold on its own. So there's a comment about being aware of what I'm always feeling. Well, don't worry about always, right? But being aware, checking in with yourself throughout the day on what's going on in your body, because your body will tell you if you're relaxed or tense. It's very literal. What's going on with your emotions, what's going on with your thoughts. And then you just come back to that space of awareness. And to reiterate on that, I talk about it a lot, but it's so important. It really is just that space that notices. And to me, it feels like it's in the back of my head where I'm just noticing thoughts, noticing I'm breathing, noticing I feel hot or cold. That's it. So it's not a specific experience. A space of awareness embraces all experiences. It's a canvas that holds all paints. It holds all the colors of life. The ego doesn't want all the colors of life. And that's what we learn to let go of. By going inwards, we start to say, oh, I have this preference. I want people to smile at me and not frown at people. I want people to like what I like and not dislike what I dislike, right? And so we start to drop all of that. And it's important because the more you do that, the more you're going to be able to handle some real difficult situations in life because, as I said earlier, the spiritual path in general doesn't get rid of difficulty in life. It just helps us to get rid of the difficulty we impose on ourselves. And in getting rid of the difficulty that we impose on ourselves, then it's easier to deal with disease, to deal with hunger, to deal with economic inequality, right? There's all sorts of different things. So I got a bunch of questions, all right. I'll try to get them in before the end. So Regina's saying, Jonas, have experienced something similar with my mother, but over time with enough inner work, I've learned to appreciate the way she plays out her role in her life because it allowed me to be the person who I am now. Gave me a deeper understanding of other people and examine my own issues and my behavior and how I'm affecting her. I love my mother more than ever, realizing that the pain and bitterness that we used to harbor between us became the medicine we both needed to heal. And that's very beautiful, Regina. And I would also add that use this love to extend it to more people, to all of life. That's so important because part of what the ego also does is it narrows your sense of love to few people. All of you have the capacity to love the whole world. The space of awareness within you already does. And so the more you bring your attention to that space of awareness, the more your heart just opens and unfolds in bigger and bigger spaces and holds more and more people. Don't let it stop with just a few people. If you do, that's just the ego once again limiting your ability to live life, to feel life, and to flow with it. Thanks, I'm glad you like it, Regina. Now from Tony, so is our ego still trying to change the external environment to suit its comfort levels, whether with family or whoever we feel triggers the emotions? Absolutely. Absolutely, that's spot on. And Sharon's asking, how do you open to love others like strangers? Well, it just starts with what I'm talking about with that letting go of the ego and letting go of your own pain. That the more pain you have inside of you, the more everything is going to seem scary. So strangers will seem scary, everything seems scary, and it seems like it's a threat to you. So as you resolve that, there's just something feels like it's an automatic impulse, Sharon, where it just kind of like opens. Right? That's what I've been kind of saying the last couple of minutes. It's just natural opening as we stop and we drop inside. We let go of this inner garbage that we have. We just keep opening. And it's like the garbage in the room example that I gave earlier. That you let it go. And now there's this more space already in the room. Where before, there's this fear of this, you had a bad experience with the last boyfriend or something. And that was garbage. That was pain sitting in the room that wouldn't allow the next great boyfriend into your life, wouldn't allow the next great teacher into your life, wouldn't allow the next great friend into your life. And it wouldn't allow any strangers, for sure. But when you get rid of that, suddenly there's room for 4 more people, where this pain was like blocking out that 4. So there's an interesting way where you don't necessarily have to think about the how of doing it. It's really how to stop not loving. Like, I feel like that's more the case, that we spend a lot of our time with our judgments and our fears and our pains deciding, well, can't love that person or that person or that person or that person. And we do it so unconsciously we don't realize we're doing it. I think we're starting to shift into a love talk. Maybe that should be the next one that I do. And by the way, you're always welcome to ask me for topics. I'm open to whatever you'd like to hear in the next coming talks. So that's where I would point you, Sharon, is that the more you let go of these fears and issues inside, there's a way that you stop having those judgments and you start to see more spaces for connection and just gentle acceptance, because that's the core of true love. It's just accepting that these people are as they are. Doesn't mean you want to be in a connection or relationship, but it just means you allow them to be. And you're not upsetting yourself. You're not choosing to be upset because they aren't. Laura would love to hear a love talk. Well, pick a particular love topic. It's a big one. Jonas is asking, why is it hard to say no to people when they ask you to do things you don't really want? It seems to avoid trouble with people. Well, once again, this goes to, what pain you're holding inside of yourself. That you're trying to appease others and avoiding your own feelings and things like that. From Tony, family being gold, as you said, points to using our ego as our ally, as it points to areas that we can work on to accept ourselves. Letting go of seeing my ego as an enemy and embracing it as part of the whole. Oh, absolutely, right? The ego to me is ultimately a filter. So usually the difference I'm making is like the unconscious ego doesn't know it exists. It doesn't know that it can change, right? And it doesn't necessarily believe that you can think in different ways or see or perceive in different ways than it sees or perceives. The conscious ego knows it's made up. It knows it's just a tool. If it's useless, we can drop parts of it. We can change it. But we usually only get to that part after we've learned how to change from the unconscious. It's the conscious ego is kind of the tool we wish we had when we were more unconscious, but there it is. Well, thanks for the comments, everybody. So we're down to 5 minutes. And it sounds like, I guess in 4 weeks, we'll talk about something about love. We'll see what Laura and I come up with. And as I said, everybody else is welcome to offer. And just a reminder once more that, I do these every 2 weeks. And you can donate if you'd like to support me at spiritualawakeningprocess.com. There's a PayPal button on the right. And so I'll just answer these last couple of questions before we close up. So Regina's saying, you're welcome, Jonas. Most of the resistance comes from the ego, like Jim said. And when you go within, you realize the gifts and lessons everyone brings into your life, especially those that trigger us the most. And from Sujata, how to let go of the negative experiences, feelings. It is a long and slow and long journey. Well, this is the thing that I was mentioning earlier about time. Right? So with time is really up to us. It's like if you want to believe this is a long and slow journey, right? That belief is an idea. And the sense of time is an idea. And both of them are going to get in the way. So don't think about that. That's thinking about a future when life is better. So that's another idea. So when some of you hear me talking about how we look at our assumptions, what I just did is I basically unpack 3 big ideas that are going to inhibit growth from what this comment is saying. So there's time, right? It's going to be hard. And there's something implicit, something that will be better later. Try and let that go and just be with the difficult experiences. Just be with it, right? It's just a different color on your canvas. And the more you can breathe and relax, the more that sort of stuff lets go. And I have plenty of other things, Sujata. I encourage you to read through my blog and different talks and shorter videos on my YouTube channel that talk about being with these feelings, identifying them, accepting, embrace, letting them go. Right? All those things, they are important, but it doesn't have to be a difficult journey. And the space of awareness is already here. So hopefully in those, they'll kind of help you to break through any sort of walls, that need to be broken through so you can start to see how simple this actually really is. Be with is just a sense of, here you are, you're already being. Don't be upset by the anger. Don't be upset by the negative response. Just notice that it's there. That's what I mean by be with. And Sharon likes to talk about true love. I have a blog about that. I think it's just called How to Find True Love. I don't know if you've read that. So I hope this helps with the misunderstandings. And as I said, there's not a set of ideas that you need to believe in blindly to get you anywhere, right? All ideas are ultimately, if they're useful, they need to be pointing you inwards to help empower you to understand that you own this space. There's no particular experience to achieve. Rather, we're coming to that space of awareness that embraces all of our experiences. And through that embrace, it makes it easier for us to deal with life, whatever life is throwing at us, because life is going to get difficult. And as I said, awakening / enlightenment doesn't get rid of difficult life experiences. Sometimes we're going to get cancer, and that's a hard thing. Right? There are other hard things. What we're doing is we're taking care of the self-imposed difficulties, our egos, our beliefs, our old pain we're holding on to in our hearts and bodies. And so there's no time, right? Sometimes the switch goes on, sometimes it doesn't, but there is an appreciation of being with the interchange and however long we need to break down these different issues and other people's energies, right? There's energy all around us all the time. And the more we're free of our own pain, the more we can be with other people's pain and whatever may come up along the way. So I hope this has helped all of you. It's my pleasure to do them. And I hope you can all join me again in 2 weeks at the 10:30 a.m. one or in 4 weeks at the 6 p.m. And I'm sending everybody lots of love and light. Once again, feel free to stay in touch through my blog. I also have a newsletter. You can subscribe to get blog updates when it posts. And I'm on Facebook, and I'm just all over the place. So stay in touch. It's a pleasure. Thanks for everybody's wonderful questions and comments. And be well in your spiritual journeys.